Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Fide Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Fide Chat at fide.email. Technology without compromise.
This is a weird talk coming from me because I talk about the Antichrist a lot, mostly in my educational videos. About once a month or so, I present the research of Father R. Gerald Culleton from his work, The Reign of Antichrist. In this work, he has essentially compiled what the church fathers, the apostolic fathers, had to say about the man of perdition, who he would be, what the condition of the world would be when he arrived. And he gives you a very Catholic take on the man of sin. The man of sin will arrive and there will be crises in the world, some material, but there's a definite emphasis in these writings of the various fathers of the church on the spiritual condition of the world. There will be an apostasy, people who've left the faith, either overtly leave the faith, or maybe they won't know that they've left the faith, but they will have ceased believing as Catholics believe. It will set the stage for the man of sin. When you hear non-Catholics, but especially non-Christians in general, talking about the Antichrist in a way that shows that they believe, you're going to notice a few things. In fact, it's a modern error, even among many Catholics today, is to think about the man of sin in a purely materialistic way. We tend to not want to think about the state of the church, what the role of the church will be in this time, tend to ignore little things like the prophesied great apostasy and other things, and instead think about AI or whatever this decade's version of the control mechanism will be for that time. I remember a time when everybody thought the man of sin would require a barcode tattooed on somebody or a subdermal computer chip or something. Now people tend to think of the man of sin using AI because it's the concerned technology of the moment. What we do know is that there will be systems set up for the man of sin. What we also know is the man of sin will be a human being. It will not be a system. It will not be an AI. It will be a man. The church has said this consistently since the beginning. It will be a man. There's a lot that goes into this, though. So what's weird is when you see outsiders, those who are not Christians of any stripe, talk about this, or those who maybe call themselves Christians, but you wouldn't know it at all by the way they not only act in public, but the way they profess their belief. And one such figure is Peter Thiel. He is a self-professed Christian. He is a non-denominational Christian, though. And I don't mean that in the rock and roll, charismatic concert, mega church. Your pastor gets up there and gives you a Bible talk for 30 minutes before some rock band comes out to lead worship or any of that stuff, before the pastor comes out to give you another 45-minute talk on his opinion on the Bible. And then maybe they pass out the Wonder Bread and grape juice. I don't mean that. There is an American error. It's often a stop along the way for people who go from being an atheist to believing in some variation of Christianity. And it's the essentially better than agnostic position. They accept that there is a God. Maybe they even accept the most basic Christian idea that Jesus Christ incarnated, born of a virgin, died on the cross, resurrected, Son of God, all that basic stuff. But then they either choose not to learn a thing about Christianity, to not choose a side in the great debates about Christianity, and instead choose to just do a me and Jesus alone kind of thing. And that's kind of what, when you read about Peter Thiel's beliefs, like what he lets you know about what he believes, that seems to be what he believes. It's unfortunate. So pray that he, as someone who professes to be a Christian, will actually cross the Tiber. But he has a strange focus on the Antichrist. And you're going to notice that it's very materialistic. So let's start here. We're going to go to the National Review, because they have this piece here called Peter Thiel's Somewhat Heterodox Christianity. To call it somewhat heterodox is to kind of miss the point a little bit on this. It's extraordinarily heterodox. And I, on a channel like this, we talk about people who have heterodox views about Catholicism all the time. And it's not unusual to encounter this, but Peter Thiel is known as a tech billionaire who advocates for AI, and his entire worldview is materialistic. So let's go here to essentially what he has to say here, because what he's worried about, his core worry, is stagnation. What will bring the man of sin is stagnation, cultural stagnation, but technological stagnation as well. And one of the things that you have to really understand here is there is a worry about technology. After all, we are all told about the system of the beast. It will be a series of mechanisms that will allow the man of sin to impose his rule on everybody, to prevent you from being able to participate in markets, meaning you are at the mercy of the charity of people in the time of the man of sin to survive, and that there will be an open persecution. So there will be a technological aspect, a heavy one, to this. But this is such a bizarre worldview that he has here, that he's focused here on almost like immortality. This is a constant return to him. You see this with the tech billionaires a lot. You see this Elon Musk, who has talked about uploading his consciousness to a computer, which is newsflash, not possible. You maybe be able to map a human brain and maybe get it to such a way that you can essentially photocopy a personality and put it on a mainframe somewhere, but you're not going to upload your consciousness, your soul, to a computer system. Sorry, that's not going to happen. But this desire to live forever is part of what he's worried about, and it's immortality. That there are this contention between Christianity and with the eternal and the material, and that's going to set the stage for the man of sin. And he might be right about that, but this has led him to wanting to give a lecture series on the Antichrist, to the point where secular media are the ones talking about this. And I put not the B here as secular. They are a Christian, frankly, anti-Catholic Christian group. And I say anti-Catholic because, well, they're part of the Babylon Bee. And the Babylon Bee has a track record of publishing things that are, quote, satirizing Catholicism. It would be one thing to make fun of Catholic public figures. We'd probably be okay with that. But what they do is they attack the Virgin Mary. They attack Jesus, and they attack the saints. They do all sorts of bizarre things, and then they get very hurt when we push back. But they were one of the ones who blew the whistle on this problem here. So their headline is Peter Thiel to give 4-part lecture series on the Antichrist to tech elites. Now, if you've ever encountered people with an obsession with technology, and I don't mean, somebody who plays a lot of video games or knows how to build really advanced computers in their garage or what, I don't mean that person. I mean those in the industries who are, and if they are not religious, if they're not grounded in faith, then this is a strange audience, because these are absolute materialists that he's going to give a talk on the Antichrist to, and he's going to speak their language. And he's going to focus his talk on the man of sin on materialism. This is why this is so dangerous. A billionaire transhumanist from Silicon Valley who wants to teach California tech elites about the Antichrist. Tech bro, transhumanist, billionaire Peter Thiel will hold a 4-part lecture series on the Antichrist starting September 15th on the new calendar, Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, because of course it is. The timing of this stuff is always fascinating. Yes, September 15th is the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. and who's paid attention to Thiel's thoughts on the Bible and the Antichrist probably has some questions right now. And everybody here is citing an interview with Ross Douthat, and I will give you that in a second. Not the whole thing, because the thing is huge, but here's the posting, the official posting for this. So if you want to go buy your tickets, well, it's sold out, but if you want to try to go, there's information. I'll have all these links at the show notes at returntotradition.org and the Anthony Stine Substack, links in the description box. This ticket includes all 4 events, Monday, September 15th, the 22nd, 29th, and October 6th. Your ticket is non-transferable and non-refundable. You are warmly invited to a series of 4 lectures by Peter Thiel, addressing the topic of the biblical Antichrist. Peter is a technology entrepreneur and investor who has spent much of his career writing and speaking about how his Christian faith informs his understanding of the world. His remarks will be anchored on science and technology and will comment on the theology, history, literature, and politics of the Antichrist. Religious thinkers upon whom Peter will draw include Rene Girard, Francis Bacon, Jonathan Swift, Carl Schmitt, and John Henry Newman. Well, he's at least got one Catholic there. These lectures are off the record. The lectures are designed as a cohesive series, with each session building on the last. To support the continuity and community, tickets are only available for the full 4-part program. This part should raise some alarm bells for you. The lectures are off the record. If he has got such a strong opinion about the Antichrist, about who that man is going to be, to the point where he wants to educate tech billionaires, tech entrepreneurs about the role they may be playing in bringing the man about, wouldn't you want those recorded and made public? Put them on YouTube and all the competitors, put them on podcasting platforms. Get maybe the History Channel to show it or something. Well, you would think so. But no, these are off the record, and that's actually kind of alarming here. But let's go to the Ross Douthat interview from the New York Times. And he goes into this interview. I highlighted there where to pick up on the theological side of it. But you can see this is a huge interview. And he spends the time talking about something you and I almost certainly have noticed, and that is called stagnation. I started noticing this years ago in pop culture, that in the world of popular music, the culture had stagnated. If you turn on top 40 radio, it basically sounds the same as it sounded back in the early 90s or late 90s, with a few minor differences, but it's the same. It used to be in the popular culture that the films, the music, the sports, everything had its own identity. The 80s had a cohesive identity. 80s movies, 80s music, 80s sports, the Lakers and the Celtics, right? Well, that's not the way it is anymore. Things have stagnated on that front. He's focused on the technological side of things. And what I find fascinating here is that this stagnation is what he says is going to bring about the man of sin. And that, I think, is where we need to pick up here. So he says, there's a macroscopic question that you're interested in. We'll pull on the religion thread a little bit here. You've been giving talks recently about the concept of the Antichrist. Note how Ross Douthat calls this the concept of the Antichrist, which is a Christian concept, an apocalyptic concept. What does that mean to you? What is the Antichrist? He says, well, I could talk about it for a long time. I think there's always a question of how we articulate some of these existential risks. This is Peter Thiel here. Some of the challenges we have, and they're all framed in the sort of runaway dystopian science text. There's a risk of nuclear war. There's a risk of environmental disaster. Maybe something specific like the thermometer problem, although there are lots of other ones we could come up with. There's a risk of weapons of a biological type. You have all the different sci-fi scenarios. Obviously, there are certain types of risks with AI. But I always think that if we're going to have this frame of talking about existential risks, perhaps we should also talk about the risk of another type of bad singularity, which I would describe as about the worldwide totalitarian state. Yes, he has a point there. Because I would say the default political solution people have for all these existential risks is government for the whole world. What do you do about those nuclear weapons? We have a United Nations with real teeth that controls them, and they're controlled by an international political order. And then something like this also. What do we do about AI? And we need global computer governance. We need a government for everyone that control all the computers, log every single keystroke to make sure people don't program a dangerous AI. And I've been wondering whether that's going from the frying pan into the fire. The atheist philosophical framing is one world or none. That was a short film that was put out by the Federation of American Scientists in the late 40s. It starts with the bomb blowing up the world, and obviously you need a government for everyone to stop it. One world or none. And the Christian framing, which in some ways is the same question, Antichrist or Armageddon. You have the state of the Antichrist for everyone, and we're sleepwalking toward Armageddon. One world or none. Antichrist or Armageddon. On one level, are the same question. Now, I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, but one question is, and this was a plot hole in all these Antichrist books people wrote, how does the Antichrist take over the world? He gives these demonic, hypnotic speeches, and people just fall for it. Is this demonium, ex machina? And Ross do not interject, saying it's totally implausible. It's a very implausible plot hole. But I think we have an answer to this plot hole. The way the Antichrist would take over the world is you talk about Armageddon nonstop. You talk about existential risk nonstop. And this is what you need to regulate. It's the opposite of the picture of the Baconian science from the 17th, 18th century, where the Antichrist is like some evil tech genius, evil scientist who invents this machine to take everything over. People are way too scared for that. In our world, the thing that has political resonance is the opposite. The thing that has political resonance is we need to stop science. We need to just say stop to this. And this is where in the 17th century, I can imagine a Dr. Strangelove, Edward Teller type person taking over the world. In our world, it's far more likely to be Saint Greta, who you are not allowed to criticize even by name. I found that one out the hard way on YouTube. I want to suggest a middle ground between these two options. It used to be, says Ross to Thought, it used to be that the reasonable fear of the Antichrist was a kind of wizard of technology. And now the reasonable fear is someone who promises to control technology, make it safe, and usher in what, from your point of view, would be a universal stagnation, right? And this is where stagnation gets interesting. He spends the first half of that interview, the first half of it, talking about the lack of technological development in a meaningful way for a long time. Now, that may sound weird to you. We all have cell phones. We're all on what, iPhone 16 or whatever at this point, or in my case, the Android equivalent. We're all on the internet, using high-speed internet, fiber optic cable. I was watching fiber optic trucks installing fiber cable, internet cable, out in the middle of nowhere in my area just the other day. We've all seen that. But what we've been witnessing is an advancement of gadgetry, not an advancement of technology. He talks about how, in this interview, over the course of the 17th century, from the 17th century to the 1970s, the ships got faster, then the aircraft were developed, and they kept getting faster and faster. Then we got cars, and they got faster and more efficient, on and on and on and on. And then it all just stopped. Then it turned into some sort of bio research, right? Or go look at the 2020 solution. What he talks about, and I found this an interesting concept, I'm curious what you think of this. We became risk averse. Now, he's an entrepreneur. This is where he's going to be using a frame of reference. Became risk averse. And I almost wonder if this risk aversion, you see it in Hollywood. If you ever wondered why we just had the 40th Marvel movie released in the theaters recently, and yet another Superman movie, and we've had just all we get are sequels and remakes and reboots and reimaginings of existing intellectual property. Thank you to Hollywood. Or why it's been that the same popular music, just with different artists, but they all sound the same, or are dominating the airwaves. In the popular culture, it's because of risk aversion. You have to wonder if risk aversion can be correlated to a loss of faith. After all, if you are a Christian, you have this concrete, real belief that no matter the risk you take and how bad things may shake out, you'll be fine because you have faith. And that faith leads people to take great risks. But in America, we've become very risk averse. I'll give you another example of this. The thermometer problem. We are told we need to build a bunch of windmills and solar panels and all this other stuff to take care of that problem, because the problem is one related to energy. Anybody who actually knows a thing about the energy infrastructure will tell you that what we actually need, if you were to just assume for acknowledge their assumption and their claim about care for our common home, Don't combat it. Just take as the assumption for the argument that they're right. That the only way you're going to take care of the problem in terms of keeping civilization going is widespread adoption of nuclear power. Modern nuclear energy, 5th generation nuclear power, is safe. Nobody wants to build it because everyone's risk averse. Nobody wants to insure it. Nobody wants to take the risk. Even the government doesn't want to take the risk. And of course, part of that risk aversion is this concept called NIMBY, not in my backyard. That's just one of these things. And energy is an interesting part of this entire conversation anyway, because he's talking about the system of the Antichrist, and people are worried about like AI and all these other things. And the thing that's going to crash the power grid more than anything else is this explosion in AI, which takes enormous amounts of power. So something has to change on that front. Risk aversion, in part of my thesis, is that if you take his claim about risk aversion seriously, it's that through a loss of faith, people have been unwilling to take risks. I know that sounds like a very American understanding of willing to take a chance. There are some American, mostly Protestants, who kind of agree with that assessment. You see it in their reading of the parable of the talents, which is a much more complicated reading or complicated parable from our Lord than most of these surface level readings have. In a declining, decaying Europe that is not a dominant player in the world, they still believe in the green stuff. Thiel says, we had this really complicated history with the way nuclear technology worked. And okay, we didn't really get to a totalitarian, all-encompassing state. But by the 1970s, one account of the stagnation is that the runaway progress of technology had gotten very scary, and that Baconian science ended at Los Alamos. And then it was. Okay, it ended there, and we didn't want to have it to look anymore. And then when Charles Manson took those chemicals in the late 60s and the slaying started, what he saw in those chemicals, what he learned was that you could be like an anti-hero in a Dostoevsky book. Everything was permitted. Of course, not everyone became like him, but my telling of the history, everyone became as deranged as that person, and the hippies took over. But Charles Manson did not become the Antichrist and take over the world. We're ending in the apocalyptic. He says, but my telling of the history of the 70s is the hippies did win. We landed on the moon in July of 1969. Woodstock started 3 weeks later, and with the benefit of hindsight, that's when progress stopped and the hippies won. And yeah, it was not literally Manson. He says, okay, I want to stay with the Antichrist just to end, says Ross. He says, okay, your environmentalism is already pro-stagnation and so on. Let's agree with that. He says, no, I'm just saying things are powerful. We're not living under the Antichrist right now, he's countered with. We're just stagnant. He says there are these different gradations of this that we can describe, but what I've just told you, so preposterous, is a broad account of stagnation that the entire world has submitted for 50 years to peace and safetyism. This is 1 Thessalonians 5:3. The slogan of the Antichrist is peace and safety, and we submitted to the FDA. It regulates not just chemicals in the US, but de facto in the whole world, because the rest of the world defers to the FDA. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission effectively regulates nuclear power plants all over the world. You can't design a modular nuclear reactor and just build it in Argentina. They won't trust the Argentinian regulators. They're going to defer to the US. And so it is at least a question about why we've had 50 years of stagnation. And one answer is we ran out of ideas. The other answer is that something happened culturally where it wasn't allowed. And the cultural answer can be sort of a bottom-up answer. That was just some transformation of humanity into this more docile kind of species. Or it can be at least partially top-down, that there is this machinery of government that got changed into this stagnationist thing. Nuclear power was supposed to be the power of the 21st century, and it somehow has gotten off-ramped all over the world on a worldwide basis. So his interviewer, a Catholic, says, in a sense, we're already living under a moderate rule of the Antichrist in that telling. Do you think God is in control of history? Peter Thiel, a quote-unquote Christian, says, this is, again, I think there's always room for human freedom and human choice. These things are not absolutely predetermined one way or another. Attributing too much causation to God is always a problem. There are different Bible verses I can give you, but I'll give you John 15:25, where Christ says, they hated me without cause. So all these people that are persecuting Christ have no reason, no cause for why they're persecuting Christ. And if we interpret this as an ultimate causation verse, they want to say, I'm persecuting because God caused me to do this. God is causing everything. And the Christian view is very anti-Calvinist. God is not behind history. God is not causing everything. If you say God's causing everything, dude, Ross Duthought, a Catholic, says, but wait. Duthought says God is behind Jesus Christ entering history because God was not going to leave us in a stagnationist, decadent Roman Empire, right? So at that point, God is going to step in. And Thiel tries to dismiss this as Calvinism, and he says that's just Christianity, says Duthought. God will not leave us internally staring into screens and being lectured to by Saint Greta. He will not abandon us to that fate. What he's talking about here is stagnation leading to essentially the enslavement of humankind, not by external shackles, but by internal shackles. That this combined with crises will allow the man of sin to arise. Now, there's a couple of major problems with this. He's a billionaire, capitalist, entrepreneur, tech bro. So his solution is growth out of this, technological advancement out of this, as if that will free us from the man of sin. I'm going to give you another one here because this has been getting picked up on. Notice I'm using only secular sources for this. It's a weird thing. At some point, you'd think that some Catholic outlet would pick up on this and dissect what he's saying here. But no Catholic wants to touch this, and I don't know why. Unheard, another secular outlet. Peter Thiel's vision of the apocalypse is AI, the Antichrist. No, the AI is not the Antichrist because the church has definitively said that the man of sin is a man. He will be accepted by our so-called elder brothers in the faith as their Messiah because he will come from the tribe of Dan, meaning he will be of them as a kinsman, as an ethnic kinsman. Don't read too much into that. That doesn't give you carte blanche to go hating on our elder brothers for that. But they deny Jesus Christ as the Messiah. They keep waiting for him. And the man they accept as Messiah will be the Antichrist. So it's not going to be AI. But AI probably is going to be a tool he'll use. AI is not going anywhere short of a total technological crash, possibly caused by thermonuclear war. And if that were to happen, that would create a different mechanism for the man of sin to arrive. Here's what they have to say. He says, Peter Thiel's a big thinker. And these days, he's been thinking about doomsday. In a series of 4 lectures he's given 3 times at Oxford, Harvard, and the University of Austin, he's tried to understand human history, and particularly modernity, within the framework of biblical prophecies of the end of days. Thiel believes that the Antichrist, whose identity is uncertain, this is why it's always dangerous when you have a non-theologian giving a theological talk, because Peter Thiel isn't sure if the man of sin is a person, a system, or a worldwide tyranny. It's a person. Pray that he becomes Catholic. And then he starts diving into Catholic sources on this because it'll become clear. The man of sin is a person. The church has said this. Universal assent of the church fathers on this, which means that you as a Catholic have to believe it. He does believe the Antichrist is not just a medieval fantasy. But their leading themes include the Antichrist relationship to Armageddon and the roles of technology and empire in the Antichrist rise. It's an ambitious, thought-provoking attempt to weave from seemingly unrelated strands of meaning a theological, anthropological, historical narrative that aims to make sense of the whole human experience. And it goes on. He says, Thiel's insight is that unlike most contemporary imaginings of global catastrophe, the Bible prophecies do more than pluck our inner strings of existential dread. They help us to understand our chaotic times. Matthew 24:24 predicts that there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and they shall deceive the very elect. In other words, the Antichrist will attempt to appear more Christian than Christ himself, even as it works to accomplish the wholesale destruction of the Christian underpinnings of Western civilization. The bad guys of World War II pursued this strategy, but were hampered by the limited appeal of their anti-elder brother ideology. German theologians fashioned a new myth of Jesus as a spirited warrior who strove to destroy that religion, and they elevated their leader to the status of the second coming of Christ, who would finish the work Jesus failed to complete, the total removal of that group and their religion. A more successful Antichrist would, like the French revolutionaries and the Marxists, promote values that seem more consistent with the Judeo-Christian foundations of civilization, such as universal liberty, equality, and justice. Thiel believes that modern science and technology have turned history into a linear progression, as the Bible teaches, with a beginning and a final irreversible end. From its inception, technology, a political project as much as one of engineering, has dangled before us the shimmering promise of godhood with which the serpent tempted Eve to eat the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. And here's the thing. He's not entirely wrong. And that's what makes error so easy to sell. Nobody gets sold a lie that is completely wrong. You go back to the Bolshevik Revolution. The condition of the people at that time was absolutely wretched. That's how they got them to fall into serious error, by exploiting the very real situation they had, pointing out very true things that were wrong with society, and then giving them the worst possible solution to it. And so Mr. Thiel's not wrong. Exactly not wrong. There will be a technological aspect to this. Stagnation certainly will play a part. But what is missing from his analysis? This is why you should pray the man becomes a Catholic. And it's the spiritual side of this. This is why, for a long time, when talking about the Antichrist, I talked about the prophecies of the ape of the church. For those who aren't aware of this, the term ape of the church comes from Fulton Sheen. He's the one who kind of coined the phrase. I've got a couple videos on that on this channel. Periodically, I revisit what he said on that, but essentially, he took this and along with things mystics have said, where they all said the same thing for the last 1,000 years of church history, that there would come a time when the adversaries of the church would be within the church. They would infiltrate the church. They would attempt to build a false edifice over the Catholic Church, and from behind that false edifice, dismantle Catholicism. That false edifice would appear Catholic, but behind it would be the dismantling of Catholicism. They would replace the Catholic faith with something that looks like the Catholic faith, but is not the Catholic faith. It would be the ape of the church, because the ape of the church mimics the church, just like the man of sin, the Antichrist, is the ape of God. He will ape or mimic Jesus Christ. You need to have the materialist understanding of things to understand like the mechanisms maybe for the man of sin, but if you focus on that, you miss everything, the most key element of this, which is the spiritual side of it. If you want to know what's setting up for the arrival of the man of sin, it's lukewarmness. If you want to talk about stagnation, talk about spiritual stagnation for a moment. What is spiritual stagnation? It's lukewarmness. It's not attempting to grow in the faith anymore. It's you acknowledge God. Maybe you acknowledge Jesus. You go to mass, pray a little bit, but you don't try to grow in your faith. You don't take the steps necessary. Going to confession as often as you should, doing those kind of off-the-cuff kind of prayers that you might do silently. You don't push yourself to engage in contemplative prayer, mental prayer, whatever the next step is for you on your journey of faith, to borrow modern terminology. Instead, it's go along to get along Christianity. Maybe you focus too much at that point on, Jesus told us to help the poor, so let's turn the church into an NGO. All those kind of things. And without realizing it, you have left the faith. Maybe on paper you're a Catholic, you still go to mass and receive the sacraments, but your belief is all but extinguished. That is the situation that sets up for the arrival of the man of sin. The man of sin will solve some existential problem. Who knows what it'll be? God willing, that won't be for another 1,000 years or something, and we won't be around to see it. But he will deceive the elect. Jesus warns us of this. How will he do that? Well, not just solving a material problem, but he'll be a miracle worker. And our so-called elder brothers in the faith will accept him as the Messiah. A miracle-working messianic figure who solves some sort of existential problem. And it makes use of the mechanisms of the secular authorities to have him elevated to being God, basically. What that will look like, who knows? Remember, 20 years ago, everybody was worried about barcodes or computer chips under the skin. Now people worry about AI. 20 years from now, it might be some other technological mechanism that everyone will focus on and will not be focusing on the most important part. AI is a tool. A tool in the wrong hands it can be used to wreak great evil. A tool in the right hands can be used to do great things. How a tool is used is what's more important than what the tool is. AI is just a tool. Without a vibrant Catholic culture, without a vibrant Christian culture that acknowledges the kingship of Christ, and that all actions in society, all uses of those tools are used in accordance with that recognition that Christ is king, the technology itself doesn't matter that much. The real stagnation, we see this all the time. There are two competing narratives right now. Narrative one, this is the hopium narrative. Gen Z is entering the church in gigantic numbers. Young men are becoming Catholic in huge numbers, and they're all going to traditional parishes or very conservative Novus Ordo parishes. They're leaving degeneracy behind. They want the stability of the faith. And it's true. That's narrative one. Narrative two is that data has shown, and I reported on this recently, that 90% of cradle Catholics leave the faith. 90%, 9-0. We don't know how many of them return later in life to the faith, but 90% of them leave the faith. The Catholic Church, like every other Christian group, is hemorrhaging believers right now. On paper, the church is growing because there's some creative accounting that goes on. You may be aware of this. Your parish will not take you off their registry. It's very difficult to get them to do this. I still get mail from a parish that my wife and I attended for about 4 months in a totally different part of the country that we live in. I still get mail for that. I used to live in the Archdiocese of Portland, Oregon. I still get the Archbishop's appeal letter in central Oklahoma from the Archdiocese of Portland. It's nearly impossible to get off these things. There are people who long since left Christianity altogether, still on their diocesan registers as being Catholic. Now, of course, we know that by baptism, you are Catholic and have that mark on your soul until you go to our Lord. And so maybe that creative accounting is actually honest. But we're hemorrhaging believers. So when I see this 1.4 billion Catholic number, I don't believe it. Because there aren't 1.4 billion people practicing the Catholic faith. There simply aren't. Peter Thiel focuses on technological stagnation, which then hampers our ability to solve these existential problems, which gives rise to the environment for the man of sin to make his sales pitch or whatever it will be. Element of truth to that, certainly. But the solution to that's not material. The solution to that is the gospel, spreading the gospel, bringing souls to Jesus Christ. I'm curious what you think of this. I'll have all these sources on my at the Anthony Stine Substack or the returntotradition.org. Traditional Catholics points out the obvious. I don't worry about Antichrist until I see the third temple built. Well, there are those efforts going on right now. You can thank American evangelicals for this. They tend to fund a lot of that stuff. They seem to think that the prophecies of the third temple are a how-to manual to force Jesus to come back. I don't know why they do this, but that's what when the third temple is rebuilt, if that happens in our lifetime, then you really should buckle up, although we really don't know what the timetable is after that for the man of sin to arrive. But to counter this is the spreading of the gospel, and you should have this from the leadership of the church. There's an open question right now. Some traditional Catholic commentators are all on board Pope Leo XIV team, ignoring the bad appointments that are coming to dioceses everywhere. I've documented a lot of these terrible bishops that he's appointed, and ignoring that a lot of those homilies he gives they sound pretty good until you actually really listen closely. Then they come out to be pretty vapid, but they're all on board. And then the other side is, well, what I was just hinting at, right? I'm not very good at being subtle about this, but there's a tug of war going on. And this tug of war is Pope Leo XIV Francis II, or is he going to be Benedict XVII? That's the tug of war. Is he going to be a very conservative Vatican II kind of pope like Benedict XVI, except Augustinian, or will he be Francis II but with both better manners? This tug of war is very divisive, and it's the secular media is playing a very strange role in promoting their preferred outcome for this. This will surprise nobody because they love them some Francis. Headline from the Globe and Mail. The Vatican was looking for an improved Francis model and just might have found one in Leo XIV. They are promoting the idea that he is Francis II. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence for that, including all of the praises he gave to Francis from the Loggia and since then. is a constant invoking of synodality and how we are going to continue the synodal project of Pope Francis. The real indications will be whenever his Roman Curia appointments come. Whenever those finally arrive, we will know. Word is they've been delayed. We'll see. If he keeps the Fernandezes in like men like Fernandez in their current post or moves them to some other equally bad post for them, we'll know. Or if he points men like who cause alarm bells to go off, who might be otherwise unknown to most people, but it turns out they're bad actors too, we'll know. There's enough there to be watchful. There's enough there to be watchful. There's already smoke there because of the bad appointments to Episcopal conferences and a lot of the kind of vapid homilies he gives. And I know that might be shocking for some people to hear, but go read his homilies. You're going to hear very little about repentance and conversion. You hear a little bit more about Jesus from him than Francis, and that's great. It's still a lot of materialist, making a better world stuff. And if you're worried about, the stagnation of the faith, making a better world is not the way you're going to light the fires of faith in people. They certainly are, the secular media, trying to sell you on the idea that Leo is Francis II. From their article, quote, "It has become customary to review the performance of political leaders after the first 100 days in office. Popes, of course, are not political leaders, although they remain head of the Vatican City-State, a sovereign entity, and the first 100 days is a mere drop in the holy font given the length of contemporary papacies. They also do not run for re-election. Once a conclave has done its work, the matter is settled, unless you resign like Benedict XVI, in which case the College of Cardinals has to start all over again. Pope Francis remained in office until his death, so the conclave that saw the election of the first American pope conformed to the traditional protocols. The result, a comparatively young Augustinian friar from Chicago with long stints in Peru, as well as time spent in the Vatican bureaucracy or curia, is the new pontiff. Cardinal Robert Prevost now has a new name and august responsibilities as Leo XIV. The cardinal electors intentionally chose a prelate who was not Francis. They did not choose an anti-Francis. They wanted a custodian, not an innovator. They wanted a stabilizer. In short, they wanted an improved Francis model." We'll pause there. If he is a custodian, if he is just stopping everything that Francis has done, by stopping, I don't mean stopping it, but not building on it, but not undoing it, that means he's letting things marinate. That means he is more on the team of Francis than not. After all, as some have pointed out, Traditionis Custodes should be repealed. Amoris Laetitia should be repealed. Fiducia Supplicans definitely should be repealed. The proposed document from Cardinal Koch on reducing the papacy to a purely advisory, symbolic role as a first among equals, a very Eastern Orthodox idea, shelved. We shall see. To Leo's benefit on all of this, part of the mystique about him is that he was elected in May, and the Vatican slows down dramatically during the summer, especially from mid-July to mid-August, when the Pope typically takes his vacation, and Pope Leo took that vacation at the traditional time. So not a lot has been done, but except for a lot of addresses, and he's invoked synodality an awful lot. And this article definitely goes into synodality, which is, again, weird because this is from a secular outlet. Whereas Francis humanized the papacy, simplified its trappings, eschewed its solemn splendor, and popularized the papal personality, Leo has revived much of the older style with its raiment and regal bearing, and disports himself with a dignity of gait and manner reminiscent of Pope Paul VI. The ebullience of the Argentine has been replaced with the reserve of the American. This is not to suggest that Leo is lacking in personal warmth. Those who know him all attest to his natural humility and native kindness in attending to them one-on-one. But the charismatic leadership of Francis is not replicated by the new Bishop of Rome. Leo is a canon lawyer by training, the first such pope in over a century, and that professional formation speaks to the way he approaches the challenges facing the Church. A graduate of the Angelicum, the Dominican Pontifical University in Rome that is known for its constitutionally conservative canon law faculty, Leo fine-tuned his legal credentials when he served as a priest and bishop in Peru, erecting legal tribunals and negotiating fraught relationships between an ultra-conservative hierarchy and an authoritarian political regime. Reflecting his legal education, Leo's natural disposition is to move with caution and a steady hand, forensic, deliberative, and risk-averse. I'm going to pause here again. If it is true that he is risk averse, you are not going to see Traditionis Custodes overturned, or Fiducia Supplicans, or any of those other things, because there come gigantic risks with that. We already know what the risks are by keeping the status quo. It's the status quo. It will just continue. You undo these revolutionary acts of Francis, you don't know what the consequences will be. And his entire point is unity. He keeps talking about unity a lot. Recent homily he gave, I read it, was all about unity and not being overtly like fake pious about it. Risk aversion seems to be a common topic we keep bringing up. People don't engage in radical change. They simply don't. Mathematics and canon law shape his thinking, but there are limitations to such a formation. The eminent Irish theologian Gabriel Daly, an Augustinian like Leo, publicly mused that his order sent him to Rome to learn what to think, and then to Oxford to learn how to think. Francis' efforts to recharge the church's updating, or aggiornamento, which is from Vatican II, to maximize the involvement of the laity at every level of church life, from Vatican governments to local diocesan decision-making, were sometimes stillborn, the casualty of hierarchical tepidity and clerical apprehension. Francis was changing the very nature of the church, his critics argued, and we needed to restore the old order before it became a footnote. Leo, a trusted confidant of Francis, offers the prospect of restoration and continuity. He departs from the Francis style, but retains a commitment to the Francis projects. His approach is understated rather than theatrical. He will not undo what Francis began, but will mitigate with the practiced Vatican subtlety, honed over centuries, the troublesome events that threaten to fracture rather than unify. But there are potential cracks in such an approach. For instance, much of the current crisis in credibility in the Catholic Church is attributed to clerical misgovernance, if not malfeasance. If the clergy, or more specifically the curse of clericalism that holds them captive, defines the heart of the problem, then the selection of candidates for the priesthood, the model and curriculum of their training, and the process of identifying and promoting bishops all call out for reform. Francis was a severe and consistent critic of the clergy, exhorting them to a behavior that conforms to the gospel rather than a lifestyle of redolence of privilege. Leo, by contrast, inclines to the affirmation rather than the exhortation model. He befriends rather than berates. But there will come a time when he will need to make hard decisions about the reforming agenda of his predecessor. And although he may have a reformer's instinct, he has yet to evidence a reformer's zeal. Francis's prophetic commitment to what he called synodality, a new way of being as a church, entails more than a safe endorsement of synodality as a new attitude or style. It means substantive and history-altering changes that require more than a papal blessing. He is dedicated to their projects, they keep telling you. We've heard that a lot, actually. We've seen it from himself. Keeps invoking synodality. I'm going to remind you that at the end of this year, we're supposed to get documents, guiding documents on synodality, making the church a more synodal, welcoming place from various committees. This synodal project's already been extended to the end of the decade, making it like the longest council in my memory, except maybe Trent. How he handles these things will also be a giveaway. But if he is there not to stop and undo what Francis did, but to let things marinate and continue the implementation, then yeah, he is essentially walking the same path as Francis, even if he is much better than Francis in terms of not berating people. The biggest problems with Pope Francis was not that he berated people. It was that he tried to radically change the church. Never forget that. Napoleon says it's interesting to know that Leo meets with Cardinal Burke. I mean, Francis met with Cardinal Burke too. I wouldn't read too much into that until we get details. I'm curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments. Do you tend to think that that article is right? That Leo is a rebranded Francis? That's kind of the article's point. Secular authorities are always trying to push, secular media especially, is always trying to push the church into directions it wants. So bear that in mind. They called Vatican II the Media Council for a reason. The secular media was out there pushing the church hard for reform, promoting narratives that the church was going to change X, Y, and Z things, and then it didn't. So let me know what you think of this in the comments. I'm curious what you think about this, and pray for everybody we spoke about today. I'm not trying to stir you up against the Pope. I'm not trying to stir you up against anybody. But it's interesting that the secular media is pushing this narrative that Leo is Francis II. We've seen this repeatedly. We've also seen it repeatedly from cardinals in the College of Cardinals. So I'm curious. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this social media helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.